Welcome to my booth. I'm Jay, and today we're talking about audiobook characters, how they come to be, how you characterize them, how you make the right choices. Because a lot of you have been asking here in coaching sessions via email, and we're going to use a series that I narrated over the last couple of years, The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things. It was a trilogy of books that had a ton of characters, and it was a really unique experience as a performer and narrator because it's somewhat of a fantasy world that lives within this book. And so I think it would be a really helpful case study to talk about how we came to the decisions of specific characters and how we were going to characterize them over the course of the recording of the trilogy, but as well as with each individual book. But to start, I'm going to talk about general rules that I follow or guidelines that I put in place, both drawn from my experience as a film, TV, stage actor, and brought it to audiobooks that I find really helpful. That's how I look at the world, is from an actor's perspective. First things first, if you're the kind of narrator that's like, I don't know how to do voices of another gender, I don't know how to make my voice do different things, I'm terrible at accents, I'm not good at blah, 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 you don't have to be. There are tons of really, really highly regarded, well-renowned, award-winning narrators that don't do character voices, really. They use subtle shifts in tone or energy in their own performance to denote, hey, another character is speaking rather than me. So as an example, if character A is talking to character B, you could be the type of narrator like me where character A maybe is, well, here we are talking to character B. How you doing, character B? And character B is just kind of, they're different character voices. But if you're not that kind of narrator, if you're not a narrator like me, or if it's the type of book that isn't served by a bunch of different character voices, you can go the tack of character, if this is my normal voice, character A might just talk a little bit like this, and character B might just talk a little bit like this. After all, when reading a book, we don't have a bunch of voices in our head necessarily. We rely on the words to denote who's talking when, and you can rely on that as a narrator. So let yourself go from the responsibility of needing to have voices. I, however, do a lot of voices more often than not, and here are the ways that I break it down. So, first, all character choices, all of them, every single one must be drawn from some point in the text, something that is evidence-based. It doesn't have to be literally printed there. Sometimes it is. It doesn't have to be. But if you're going to make a choice for a character, there should be clues that support that choice within the book. So, for example, if I take Moby Dick and give Ishmael a southern drawl, that has no support in the text. If Ahab comes in and starts talking like this, can you imagine if Ahab was on the bow of the ship hunting Moby Dick like this? Something like that you don't want to do. So any choice you make, as long as there's some evidence that you're pulling from the book itself, then you're golden. You can't really make a wrong choice if there's support for it. Some people might not like it, but that's their problem. So moving to that's the big disclaimer. The first thing that I'll look for in any book are literal clues from the text, things that are written down that I can pull from and say, this is what the character should sound like. And some of those are hard facts, like if the character's voice is described, maybe they're described as having a reedy or thin voice, or maybe they're described as having a booming voice, or maybe they're given an accent that sounds a bit like something else. Anything that's written down that says this character's voice sounded like, I note it down and take that as something that I should follow. The next thing is more of a soft trait in terms of how I should vocally perform them, and that's personality traits. If a character is really self-assured, then maybe they talk a little bit more slowly, a little bit more deliberately. If they're a really nervous character, maybe they'll talk a little bit more quickly because that kind of supports a nervous energy, something that they're really unsure about and they're darting around. So I can take personality traits and draw from those. And those are somewhat optional, but they can support how you might choose to perform any given character. And then the third thing Still somewhat a soft fact to pull from are the character's relationship to other characters and their relationship to the world, how they behave within it and how they comport themselves with relation to either characters or the world. So, for example, if we go back to that really self-assured character versus that really nervous character, if that really self-assured character has a lot of status in the world, status meaning they rank higher than everyone else. Perhaps a CEO walks into the boardroom and all of a sudden everyone else shushes and I have control of the space. I can take up time and space, and if he's a magnanimous CEO, hey, how's it going, everybody? Or if he's a chilling, corrupt CEO, then you can make different choices. And sometimes in those things, personality traits and how they interact with the world, this is where you kind of want to caution yourself or make choices either that play into the character's sort of niche or type or archetype or against it. For example, Hannibal Lecter, one of the most famous villains of cinematic popular culture storytelling history. He is a terrifying individual, coldly calculating, incredibly intelligent, capable of extremely violent acts, and he's just a really scary guy. But because he's played as Clarice. Hello, Clarice. Ah, I smell that perfume on you. He's haunting and terrifying, rather than being a creepy serial killer, Clarice, welcome down to my cell. If he was played like that, he wouldn't have nearly the amount of impact that he does by being against what would maybe be a typical thing for a crazy mass serial killer type person. He's played against that. Calm, collected, highly intelligent. You know he's done those things, and they're all beneath the surface. So a character you can make the choice to play against the grain. In one of the books that I narrated recently, the Caught Stealing series, there are lots of characters that fall into perhaps typical archetypes. And because there were quite a few characters that could easily fall into just a tropey performance, a character's a bad guy, so I'm going to make him sound like a bad guy. That's kind of boring. And the beauty of those books and why I was compelled to make sort of against the grain choices was it's fun to make a character if they're dirty cop, for example, make them really, really affable and just haunting in the sense that they move so coldly through the world, as an example. So those are the different things that I'll pull from in terms of literally from the text. Voice notes, how the voice is described, personality traits, how the character interacts with the world, and relationship to the world and other characters. All those things will give me clues as to how I might perform them. Moving from that, sometimes I'll ask authors if they have any ideas. Typically, I frame this as if there was going to be an actor or a character in an existing movie or TV show that would be a good reference point for a character, what would you have in mind? This can be helpful for a couple reasons. One, it allows me to get firm sign-off from the author in terms of what they're looking for, so that at the end of the process, we don't run into a really rough situation, which hasn't happened to me, but can happen at times, where an author will review the book and say, that's not how this person should sound at all. And then you're kind of up a creek in a way. So it acts as a little bit of an insurance policy, but also it helps to direct your performance and gives you clues. So it can lighten the load from you as a narrator, which was really, really helpful in these books because Rob Renzetti, the author of them, he's a fantastic animator. All of the blurbs of praise here are from awesome animators that he works with, the creator of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and the Powerpuff Girls, the creator of Gravity Falls, and Rob worked on a lot of those shows and similar shows as well. And so coming from that world, he has a really, really distinctive idea of the characters in his mind. So we were able to collaborate a lot on this book. And because there were so many characters in the world that he created, it was helpful for me because I got frankly overwhelmed once we got into book 2 and 3. I was running out of voice ideas that were coming easily to me. So by pinging Rob and saying, hey, what kind of things do you have in mind for these characters? It just made my job a little bit easier. Now, that whole conversation isn't necessarily typical, but I really appreciated having that with Rob in this book in particular. It was great. I'll talk more about it in a moment. Beyond those things, if the author has specific ideas about who might play a character and the insurance policy, it can be helpful if they have unscripted ideas. I've worked on a few books where characters don't really have a lot of information to go on, but perhaps there's a series of books that I will come in on book 4 as an example. A minor character shoots off and gets their own book all of a sudden. I don't have a lot of context on books 1 through 3, but I'm in charge of book 4. And it can be helpful in those cases to know, like, hey, this character, what's their history from these 3 books beforehand? Because I can't read all 4 books in order to perform one of them. That's just not financially feasible for me as a business thing. But it's helpful to get those things from authors if that's part of the equation. So that's another reason to talk to authors there. Finally, when compiling all of that information, we go into a logistics phase. And what I mean by the logistics phase is if I look at a book in total, there's a cast of characters, and I'm limited by only having the one voice that I have. Granted, my voice has a lot of flexibility within it, and I'm good at modulating it a bunch of different ways, but it's still just one set of pipes that I'm stuck with. And so within that, I have to be able to perform a full cast of characters distinctly. And in that case, it's important to sort of map out how the story weaves together in a sense. If 2 characters go through the entire book and never interact, and they're pretty similar characters, I could probably perform them pretty similarly and not have to worry about readers or listeners getting confused. Because if they're never crossing paths, then I don't have to worry about them interacting, which is one reason why it's important to read the full book before you dive into narration so you can know if I'm going to perform this character like this and I'm going to perform this character like this, they sound pretty similar. But if they don't interact at all, then it's fine probably. But if I get to chapter 25 and all of a sudden this guy and this guy are in the same scene, I'm going to be in trouble. So that's a helpful thing to bear in mind. Beyond that, in terms of logistics, I'll map out shared scenes. So how many scenes they'll be interacting with each other. And then in context of the whole piece. What I mean by that is if there's a character that's a minor character, but they're important, I'll spend time to make sure that that voice is distinctive, unique, but I don't have to ensure that that voice is sustainable for the entirety of the novel. So if, for example, it's a first-person novel and the protagonist, I'll probably keep that pretty darn close to my natural voice just to keep things simple for myself. And frankly, if I got cast to do the protagonist, it should probably stay pretty close to just me at home. But if a character is in like one scene, I could probably opt to do a character that's a little bit more challenging for me to sustain for a long period of time, whether that's because I would run into vocal fatigue if I tried to do this for the entire book. But I could do that character for maybe a couple chapters, but I wouldn't want to do it for a full book. So that's another thing logistically that I'll map out. And then an interesting thing that was happening with this book and this trilogy is I was narrating these as Rob was writing them, which was a unique experience for me because I don't have the context, nor did Rob, of the full arc of the story necessarily. Things were developing as we went. And with respect to that, characters would come up that would maybe cross with characters from book 1. So in book 1, if I narrated a character in a certain way, and then book 2 comes along, and the character's fairly similar, I might run into trouble as that developed. So that was just a challenge to bear in mind as we went. But talking about this book, it was really, really lovely to work with. A, because the narrator was meant to be in RP, this accent here. And many of the characters, because we had such a cast for the whole of the 3 books, all of the characters that popped up, because it was a fantasy world, we were given a lot of license to just go wherever we wanted. And that was really, really liberating. So the main character, Zenith, was just kind of an American kid, 11 years old or so. And he just kind of had to have, brighter, youthful voice. One thing about youthful characters, as we age, our vocal cords begin to relax. And that's kind of why older people tend to have lower tones, because our vocal cords have relaxed over time. So older voices tend to have a little bit of a lower tone, whereas younger voices tend to have a little bit more of a brighter zip to them because the vocal cords are just a little bit more youthful or sprightly. And so Zenith was that, and then many of the other characters kind of flowed from there. We had the narrator, which was going to be in this voice, and then we had the gargoyle Creeble, my favorite character of this series. She has a really unique way of talking.
Well, she would talk kind of like this, and it was liberating because I didn't have to worry about her having a necessarily feminine tone because she just had to have this sort of thing, and it was nice to have her have punctuated energy because she turns to stone, and because she turns to stone, I could bring in these little moments and then pop into this little...
It was so fun to voice her. And then as the books progressed, we had larger casts of characters that would stem from maybe a race or species of monsters, I'll say, from the world of the book that would stem off to specific characters. And that was helpful to have Rob's input on because there was I can't remember what they're called in the books, but they're these boxy type characters. And there was one that, I can't remember how I voiced him, but it was kind of like Irish a little bit, and he had a bit of a older tone to him. That's not dead on, but his name was Old Timer, and he was a delight to voice in that way. And then there was another character called Musclehead, which was very distinctive and had a pretty unique challenge to him. The character is essentially a bodybuilder who has worked out so much in this mystery world that his muscles have overgrown his entire head. So he's described as having a muffled voice because his head is literally buried under muscle. And the unique challenge to that character is he has to be muffled still because that's how he's described, yet he still has to be intelligible. So this is a good pulling from the facts. He has to be intelligible for the sake of the audiobook, but he has to have a muffled voice. He's a bodybuilder. His whole thing is he runs in and just beats people up. He's a bruiser, kind of.
So he kind of went like this with Musclehead, where I gave him a deeper voice, but I kind of gummed up my mouth to make him sound a bit more buried within himself. And this...
Anyway, that was kind of Musclehead. And there were loads of other characters. One of my favorites, I did a behind the scenes here, was Munsey. Munsey, the scribe of Grabog. He's a very haughty raven whose entire purpose is to inscribe the history of this mystery world into the great collectory of Grabog. I loved just officious sort of Winston Churchill, Nixon-y, Ian McKellen-esque type fella. And then his brother, who is a raven. This was another unique challenge. There's
Munsey the raven, who is uptight, very buttoned up, and his job is to manage the collectory. Everything must follow order.
And then there was Hugh. Hugh was his brother, who is the Seeker of Grabog. And as he flies through the air, he's a bit of a gallivanting fellow. He runs around. He's caught gambling at one time. And I wanted him to have a bit more of a cavalier approach. So Montse lives here, and the Raven lives here. And Hugh, the Seeker of Grabog, lives here. Anyway, if you'd like to hear more about Grabog, let me know. I'm happy to talk more about it, maybe dive into some examples. And of course, if you've got young ones around, 8 to 12, these books were a blast. They really, really were a blast. Loved the story. Great cliffhangers all the time. Rob's a genius. It was just a blast. So check them out if they're of interest to you and if you want to hear all the different twists and turns there. Anyway, hope this is helpful for you. If you'd like to see more of these, let me know. And thanks for being here. If you like the stuff and find it helpful, I'd appreciate clicking the buttons. Until the next one of these, be well, everybody, and I'll see you there. Toodles.